G. Mark Hardy.
Well, thank you, Ben. Hey, it might not be good. You probably shouldn't be applauding quite yet. Okay, what I want to come up with is this I wanted to do a little bit differently. So I've been back and forth with Win. I was really looking forward to the InfoWarcon because our chance to talk about doing a lot of things. And for the most part, we've listened to a lot of really smart people give us their insights on areas of deep expertise. But what I've found in my career is I look for things that people aren't talking about. And I propose them as speaking topics. And then, heaven help you if you get picked, because now you got to do all your homework. But it allows me to go ahead and learn about things that I might not learn otherwise. And so one of the things I really wanted to look at is this whole thing with digital currencies. And can these be weaponized? And so what I want to do with this is a little bit different, is I want to turn this more into an interactive workshop than just a lecture. Now, by the way, I need a cheap plug in here. One of the events I'm looking at doing in September is SpyCon, so throw that on your calendar, 12 to 14 September. By the way, still trying to lock down the scope of this. We're looking at technical surveillance countermeasures, physical pen testing, things like that, but we're looking to see what else. So if it's interesting, talk to me afterwards, send me an email or something like that. But that'll be fun, and we'll give you some special rate because you're here at InfoWarcon. By the way, the spycon.org website is right now sinker because I'm trying to negotiate the price down on the .com. I don't want it to look like I got anything going. Well, the first digital currency that I think we want to play with is I want to talk about Bitcoin. Who here has Bitcoins? At least some segment of it. Do you have anybody have more than one? Okay, so what we find then is it's a good thing Bitcoin is divisible almost infinitely down to 8 decimal points, a little Satoshi. So who here could not explain Bitcoin to your mom? It's okay. All right, assuming you still have a mom that's still around. So what I want to do is just a couple quick slides to use this as an example currency. Came out about 5 years ago by Satoshi Nakamoto. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? I don't know. Who is John Galt? This is a pseudonym. The individual or individuals who developed this have not identified themselves, but rather sort of went sinker. But it's a fiat digital currency, which means it's not backed by anything other than the fact that somebody said it exists. Open source, so that you can look at the code. It's peer-to-peer, which means that I can transfer money directly from here to here. If I want to transfer money to Sweden, I otherwise have to go through a bank or financial institution. They're going to skim a few points off the top. Very inefficient, good for the banks, bad for us. Now we can go peer-to-peer. It's completely decentralized. There is no place to shut it down. You can't go and arrest somebody and say shut down that server because there is no centralized server. It was designed as a peer-to-peer. And because there's no intermediary, it allows for almost frictionless transactions. We'll get to that in a minute. But the way it's maintained is through a public ledger. It's all through a pseudonym. You create your artificial identities. In fact, they're automatically created for you. So if I transferred money from myself to you, and Ingvar said, here's some money for you, nobody else would really know that I moved money to you. There'd be a record of it, but unless somebody ties me or you to that particular record or you talk about it, it has that benefit. Now, so the advantages of a cryptocurrency: lower transaction costs, theoretically approaching zero. Although if you want to get into the game, there's usually exchange factors, and we're looking at things like Andreessen Horowitz spending money, in some cases $15 million, backing some of these cryptocurrency exchanges. Remember, the guys who made the money in 1849, they got to keep it, were the one or two miners who actually discovered gold. But the real money was made by the people selling the pickaxes and the shovels to the miners who were out there looking for gold, because that was a no-risk business. You're banking real currency when you sell them this stuff. Think about that as we talk more about this. The idea of increased privacy. Wow, it's a pseudonymous transaction. Nobody knows who I am. The problem is, of course, we'll find out it is by no means anonymous, but we'll get back to that. And theoretically, long-term inflation protection, because the U.S. dollar could hyperinflate into Zimbabwean territory, but yet the Bitcoin would retain its value. Of course, the disadvantage is incredible volatility. We've seen this thing go from about $30 to $1,100, back down to $800. At any one point in time, you'll look there, and the Bitcoins are all over the place. By the way, everybody know the stock markets are melting down today? Yeah. Dow down over 250 points. International markets tanking, tanking, tanking. Yeah, it's the beginning of the end. We're sitting here fiddling as rumblings.
Bitcoin's at $10 billion market cap.
Ta-da! Woo! Yeah.
So the Titanic was sinking as well, right?
Yeah, but they still had the band assemble on the deck. Okay, but some days I feel like my job is to polish the brass on the Titanic. It's going down. Hey, its brass is looking nicer, but you're sort of missing the big picture. Theft and fraud, we've heard a lot about that in the news, where people are going ahead and stealing these digital wallets, or actually breaking into the exchanges, or even setting up fictitious exchanges. People deposit all their values, and it's a bank on roller skates. Vroom, off it goes, and it disappears.
Got a great screensaver for you to run.
The thing here is that if you talk to people who are Bitcoin positive, you have Bitcoin. Spend it today, right? Why not liquidate your position? It's worth what? $800? Go for it. Will you spend it today?
Would I?
Yes.
Sure.
Go do it.
No.
Well, why not? I mean, why?
Tiger Direct takes Bitcoin as of yesterday.
Tiger Direct takes Bitcoin as yesterday, and we're getting to it. But what we're finding is a lot of people talk, you want to spend it? Oh, no, why? It's going to be worth more. Well, as Scott would tell you, being the economist, inflation here is going to work in reverse, because when you look at the world through Bitcoin, you see U.S. dollars getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Well, why would I go ahead and buy dollars with my Bitcoin today when dollars will be cheaper tomorrow? And that is the insidious thing that happened to the Japanese economy for 21 years. And I think back in '08, and you could probably argue this, but it's not the point of this talk, why the Fed decided to pump hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy, saying it's easier to deal with inflation, even high inflation, than it is to deal with deflation. Because you've got tools on this side. You can control the money supply, you can stop buying stuff, you can crank up the interest rate. But on the back end, there's not much that you can do. So we have wins Bitcoin.
Don't spend it all at once.
Don't spend it all at once.
That's my retirement coin.
This is his retirement coin, because you listen to some people, their predictions, quite honestly. One of the guys from Andreessen Horowitz says $10,000 to $100,000 within 12 months. This little piece of metal. Okay, so there we go. We just make it disappear. And those old high school magic tricks come in really, really handy. And of course, it's not backed by any government, which is the advantage of the libertarians who feel that. If you haven't seen one of these, you can pass this around.
And I do get it back.
Yes, please return it to him. Now, how could I use it? Well, it's wonderful for money laundering, because if I can move stuff into Bitcoin, I am completely invisible to law enforcement. I can move transactions. One of the things Scott had said is about moving money back and forth in terms of criminal fraud. Well, I've limited for credit card transactions. It's tough to do a $3 million transaction on a Visa card, but it's entirely plausible to do so in the Bitcoin world, and it does indeed have happened. Illegal goods, why not? Hey, yeah, you can go ahead and go on Tiger Direct, but the reality is Tiger Direct isn't really taking Bitcoins. What they are doing is they are dragging an exchange in front of you so that when you deposit the Bitcoin, out pops a dollar bill for them. They're not taking any risk. Their risk managers should be fired if they went ahead and said, hold these things for more than the microsecond it takes. Although it's not a microsecond. It's 10 to 60 minutes for this thing to clear. So you're going to push the risk back onto the consumer. Large sums across the border, great. $10,000 crossing the border, here's the problem. What if you got your one Bitcoin in your pocket, and hey, wow, Bitcoin's at $9,000, and by the time you get to the TSA line and they take a look at you, Bitcoin, whoa, it's worth $10,004. Well, you're over the $10,000 limit, off to the room with the plastic glove. Or it gives your 20-something-year-old kid something to do in his basement, but just watch your electric bill, because you'll find out that that might be through the roof, which isn't a bad thing today, because all that heat generated from all the calculating will help offset some of this global warming that we're experiencing. Didn't somebody get a Nobel Prize for that recently? I think we should pull that back and set fire to it. Anyway. Yeah. The way it works is it creates a transaction ledger. There is no such thing really as a Bitcoin. That's a physical thing, but that's not the value. Rather, what it is there's a series of ledger entries that says from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, and C to B, and all these things chain down. Well, at the end of the period of time, well, how do we make sure we lock that thing down so that nobody goes back and changes the history? Well, we do that by going ahead and we have these transactions that are posted to the ledger, and other people will validate the ledger. So I want you to go ahead, take this whole value, produce a SHA-256 hash of the whole thing, and then I want you to add to that kind of your address to say, hey, I'm the guy who did the work, and post it up there, and we will reward you with 25 Bitcoins. Well, wait a minute, if the Bitcoins are worth $900, that's like $20,000. That's like no effort at all. Well, why not? Let's go for it. In the early days, Bitcoins were easy to mine. That's what mining is doing it. So we said, well, let's create a work factor. The idea with a proof of work which came out of the spam or anti-spam industry, that if somebody sent you an email and you didn't know who they were, you could go ahead and push back to the mail server that sent it to you and say, hey, before I accept this message, go ahead and compute the cube root of 8643299 and make it do something. And if it's a real mail server, it's like, okay, fine, I'll take the minute or second of transaction time, figure it out, send you the answer, you clear the spam filter. But if somebody's selling out a million spams, they're not going to have the cycles or the interest to do that work factor. They can't validate the spams get dropped. Well, the idea got pulled into the currency, so here's how it would work. When we use this transaction ledger and we put this digital hash, we're using a hashing algorithm, which is... What hash algorithm is being used? SHA-256. Secure hash algorithm, 256 bits. Well, that's kind of, well, so what, who cares? That's easy to calculate. But here's where it gets interesting. Now what we're saying is that if I produce a hash, and you probably are familiar with what hashes do, they will take an arbitrary input size and they will condense it down to a fixed output size. Hey, Win, this is a good way to make him lose weight. This is better than a laser pointer with the cat.
They just said it's going to $1 million.
Bitcoin.
They just said it's going to $1 million.
Woohoo! All right, then sell it to him right now for $100 grand, and you're both happy. In any case, back to the presentation already scheduled. What happens is this. They say, well, don't just give me any old SHA-256 hash. I want a SHA-256 hash of those 256 bits. The first n bits begin with 0. Well, how am I going to do that? It's like rolling the dice, because with the hash, I can take an arbitrary input, mangle it, get some fixed link output. If I change one bit up here, how many of the bits on average will change down here? Half of them. There's no such thing as being close. You either got to be spot on or it doesn't work at all. So what you do is you say, okay, well, I've got the transaction ledger. I add one more transaction, issue 25 Bitcoins to Gmark, and then I have one more field, a nonce, a number used once. So I throw a 1 in there, and I stick it into my SHA-256 hashing algorithm, pull the handle, and see what comes out. 1, 0, damn, so 2. 0, 1, only 1, 0. 3. And what I keep on doing is because I do this like a billion times, 2 to the 20th is 1 billion. And so now, on average, eventually I'm going to stumble into something that begins with 20 zeros. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Like a low number license plate or low number serial number in your dollar bill. You go, got it. I take that thing and I race it up to the transaction ledger and I post it for everyone to see. It said, haha, I was there first. Now, everybody else who's working on it, first of all, goes, curse is spoiled again. But they'll go and validate. They'll look at your transaction register and they'll calculate the same SHA-256 hash with the transactions, the one you added, which says give me 25, and the nonce, and lo and behold, sure, it does begin with 20 zeros. So I guess this is legit. And what happens is enough of them will vote on it, if you will, 51% of the machines then say, yay, verily, it's good. And then everybody gives up working on that problem, and you go on to the next piece of chain to work. And it auto-adjusts itself, but about every 10 minutes, this thing spits out some Bitcoins. It's designed to go ahead and trail off to eventually about 21 million coins. And this work for it factor does what? If I want to go back and forge a transaction, I could try that. And I could spend a billion cycles and eventually calculate a hash that would work. But by then, what's happened? Well, the world's moved on. There's more transactions. Oh, I got to forge that one and forge that one. And the idea is that the work factor makes it so you're in a hopeless tail chase if you're trying to forge. And if the chain splits, like you get little alternatives, the shortest chain loses, it gets flicked off, it gets pruned, the longest one lives, and off you go. So how do you get Bitcoin? You could buy them. There are currency exchanges where you can go ahead and you can take real hard currency and say, yay, verily, I want to swap this thing or this pile of things for some part of a Bitcoin. And they will do it for you for a percentage. And there's money to be made selling the pickaxes and the shovels right here. You could also go ahead and exchange them for goods or services. I think there are prostitutes now who will take Bitcoin. All right, I'm not sure where you insert them, but you can use your imagination. But what you find out is that what did you say? Tiger Direct is doing it. Some universities are doing it. It's now more of a public relations stunt to say we take Bitcoin because it gets you a news broadcast. An otherwise unnewsworthy organization, Joe's Pizza, now takes Bitcoin, makes the national news. Or you could mine them, and that's this process I told you of cranking away. Because the work factor gets harder as more people try, it auto-adjusts. It's like those exercise, you see those tractor pulls where they have the weight, and as the more you tractor pulls it, the weight shifts and it makes it harder and harder and harder. So in the early days, Bitcoins are really easy to mine. You could mine them on your laptop in your spare time, like a SETI screensaver. But then you had to get faster and faster, went to graphics processing units. And now we're at the point now where they have ASICs that are designed to do this. FPGAs aren't even fast enough, so people are making and selling for thousands of dollars these high-power, high-performance, specialized computers that do nothing but crank out SHA-256 hashes with a little different nonce on every single one. Somebody making pickaxes and shovels, getting the money. The economics are such that because they're mined at a predetermined rate, and we're only about 12 million into the 21 million, and we got another 100 and some odd years to go, it's going to tail off. Over time, they cut the reward. It was 50 every 10 minutes, now it's 25, and it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's down to the 8th decimal point, which you say, well, so what, who cares? But think about it. If I went down to the 6th decimal point and called that $1, and today with 12 million out, that would be about the equivalent of $12 trillion, and the M1 money supply is about $11 trillion. So there's already in circulation enough sliceable Bitcoin that you could replace penny for penny every US dollar in every bank account and brokerage account and in cash and pocket and roaming around the world. And today there are only about 40,000 transactions. So as an economist will tell you, be careful when the value of something exists only at the margin. Because if you tried to sell them all at once, think about what happened. So the impact could be a number of things. You're worried if you are a real government about what could happen in this case. Could this impact the quantity of money? Well, if all of a sudden Bitcoin really took hold, and then all of a sudden people are swapping Bitcoin back and forth, and they're not using US dollars, how do you as the US Fed try to control or influence the US economy, or any other country's equivalent of the Fed with a fiat currency do that?
Or how do you tax it?
Or even detect it and tax it and regulate it and moderate it and track it. Also, because the demand for real currency goes down, I really don't know how big my economy is anymore. I can't tell what's happening. Now my monetary policy gets very, very difficult because it's no longer, oh, let me go ahead and buy up bonds or buy up treasury-backed securities or change my short-term interest rates and hope that I can pull the long-term rates around. I don't get those controls anymore. And there's something called network externalities. Basically, given a choice, you're going to pick a currency that you recognize over one that you don't.
I mean, theoretically, the government could influence that, though, if they bought Bitcoin, right?
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, Silk Road, yeah, they got government's one of the bigger holders of Bitcoin right now. But as we say right now in the United States, we feel more comfortable with the greenbacks. But let's go this network externalities. Who wants to swap some money for this? This is my souvenir from Saudi Aramco when I was working with them a few months ago. This is a Saudi Riyal with the King Abdullah. And so what we see is we say in the U.S. we like U.S. dollars. We get Canadian coins in our change when we're up near the border, and you go, not so. Actually, they're kind of worth a little bit more, now they're worth less. But in general, we tend to look for things that we recognize. Now, things that are working against Bitcoin is they're technically not legal tender, although they're generally accepted. I could trade you 2 bearskins and a cow in exchange for something else, and if it works, it works. It's still kind of, sort of, maybe in the barter system, but the problem is IRS has never figured out how to tax the barter system effectively, and so we probably don't want to think about it that way. It's not yet generally accepted. If I go back and I go to the airplane, I go ahead and plunk down a few Satoshis and say, hey, I want to buy a plane ticket. It's not going to work here. I can't buy it with Saudi Riyals here, but I can buy them in good old US dollars or credit card denominated in dollars. The volatility is all over the place. September of last year, down around $50. By December, up over $1,200 briefly, cascaded over. What a roller coaster ride. It's not a currency, it's a commodity. And a very volatile one at that, or think of it as a dot-com stock in 1999, Company with no earnings and no product, but a lot of promise. And so people bid, up. And so what happens then, because it's driven by speculation rather than being a preferred means of exchange, it's a great place to make money, but in most cases in speculation, who makes the money? Very few.
The pickaxe.
The pickaxe sellers, the guy running the exchange.
Early adopters.
Or early adopters, which brings us to an interesting question as we look at who are the early adopters and who's got the hordes of Bitcoin. Oops, back up one. And so Congress has some issues to say about that, because if you go back and look at the Constitution of the United States, Congress has the authority to coin money and to regulate the value thereof. So if we consider this to be money, all of a sudden we run up against that. Also, there's a Stamp Act of 1862. What happened is back during the Civil War, metal coins almost disappeared from existence. You think there's value in metal right there, and so you could exchange postage stamps for fractional currency. But the Stamp Act said nobody else can issue fractional currency to compete with the U.S. postage stamps. Well, a Satoshi, unless the value of a Bitcoin goes over 100 billion, is going to be worth less than $1, and therefore it could fall into there. And again, there's a legal framework they're trying to figure out, the Electronic Funds Transfer Act, Bank Secrecy Act. The fund's going to end when this thing has to be run like a real bank, where you got to hire a room full of lawyers and a room full of accountants just to comply with your accounting requirements for the government. And back to your question about early adopters. Satoshi Nakamoto. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
We don't know.
We don't know. There's some rumors that it might be a professor out in Pennsylvania. There's also some rumors that it could be, I don't know, NSA, unlikely. There's also some, it could be. It's like spot the Fed, spot the Satoshi, you know. But here's the cool thing about it. In the early days, who cared about this? Nobody. And in the early days, did you get more or fewer Bitcoins per unit of time? More. And in the early days, was it easier or harder to mine or calculate the Bitcoins?
Easier.
Much easier.
Verizon commercial.
Therefore, it's possible that the early guys who started this thing have amassed about 1 million or so Bitcoins. The U.S. government on Silk Road, I think, got 155,000 of them, making the U.S. government possibly the #2 holder. But you also read about Bitcoin billionaires, and a lot of them tend to be people in whom? Organized crime, because there's some great opportunities here. Hey, let's write some malware that becomes a botnet that runs on your machine, and all of a sudden your machine is running like crazy, and when you contribute to part of solving this problem, because you can distribute the problem, and whoever gets first with the mostest wins. So the first team to solve this puzzle of finding that right nonce to go ahead and give you the 0.0000000 thing wins, and then congratulations, you get 25 Bitcoins. And there was some cases where people had discovered screensavers and browser helper objects and things like that, and they're going to go ahead and arrest them for it for malware, but buried into the end user license agreement was a little statement that says the software may from time to time do mathematical calculations. And these mathematical calculations may be used to solve economic issues, and any benefit goes to the vendor, not to you. So you've sort of complied with that, just didn't see it coming. And so it's starting to hit mainstream. I've started looking at Bitcoin back in March of 2011 when Forbes ran an article on it saying, this thing is about run its course. It's gone from a fraction of a penny to almost $1. And of course we saw it go up to $1,000, and who knows, maybe it'll go back again. But think about it. If the value of this currency is based on scarcity, and it's really the only thing that's here, is artificial scarcity. Scarcity is one of the 6 principles of influence by Dr. Cialdini, if you ever read his book, Science of Persuasion. Things such as authority will give you a chance to influence others. Scarcity is one of them. Hey, only 3 tickets remain. Sale ends at midnight tonight. Buy right now. Or social proof, everybody else doing it. Fashion relies on that. So my assertion is that what we have is a psychological entity. It's being considered by those believers to be a currency, an economic instrument, but in fact it's a psychological instrument because its only value is in the human psychology. If you actually looked at it abstractly, if you could be a Vulcan, it would be illogical, and it wouldn't work. Now, it's interesting, you take a look just yesterday's news, last night. J.D. Morgan Chase CEO denounces Bitcoin is terrible, predicts its downfall. And as you see, this thing came out less than 24 hours ago on the Newswire. He's basically saying it's a terrible store of value, and he's right from the perspective that the volatility, it's here, it's not where you'd want to put your fortune. That said, you want to play with it for a little while? Sure. Think about it like going to Vegas, but you don't have to leave the house.
Would you accept bitcoins in payment for your work?
Yeah, would you be happy to accept bitcoins and knowing that you couldn't get rid of them for at least, I don't know, a day or two until you actually got to get to the exchange? Some people who are believers would. Others, because it's so volatile, would not. And so therefore, you got to judge yourself based upon that high volatility. It's tough to think of things that are highly volatile right now, but you can think of them as something that might come and go like the spin of a wheel at a roulette table. Would you exchange this value of your services for whatever number comes up next? My number's 36 or 37, because there is no 37, so you're safe with that. But if you get any other number, you might get lower. You might get more. So my thought is you may not be interested in the IRS, but the IRS is interested in you, with apologies to Vladimir Lenin. And the idea there is that if it can be imagined, it can be taxed. And what we're going to be doing is that if this continues to move on, and cryptocurrencies will work. My personal prediction is they're going to go the way of Napster, where Napster came out as a great peer-to-peer file sharing system. Everybody loved it, a lot of real believers. And then the music industry, banking industry being the corollary, says, whoa, we're losing a lot of profits. Goes rent-seeking to the government. Hey, we want you to shut it down. Government smacks them down. But then somebody smart, Steve Jobs, says, wait a minute, we can make money with that. We call it iTunes. And so back comes the business model that blessed by the government, blessed by corporations, because companies can go ahead and buy more congressmen than the entrepreneurs can, and the laws are favorable. So we'll come back in some form of a digital cryptocurrency, but I sort of suggest it's not going to be this. It's going to be something. I don't know what. But today we're going to build a weapon, because this is the interactive part. I want you to think evil. I want you to be like Lex Luthor. Think total global domination. Yeah, steeple your fingers.
You skipped the last part of the previous slide, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Who's got?
Oh, yeah. Who is Bitcoin positive? You know, look, Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, or the Winklevi is a proper plural, I think, and big holders because they want to set up an exchange. The Department of Justice, and of course the Satoshis. I mentioned those already in passing, but the idea is that there's some people that make big bets on this. The hard part is the easy mining has already been done. Now you have to go ahead and you really need a lot of horsepower, and you pretty much join guilds, and some of these guilds are up to about 40% of the total amount of miners. Now remember the danger. When you get to 51%, you could forge that blockchain. You could rewrite history. And now you could create artificial transactions, and you always win on the vote, and so you could keep putting in fake transaction after fake transaction. Nobody can outvote you, and you could empty out the system. Well, eventually, the argument against that is, well, people lose faith with it, and all the money you put into it would get lost, and therefore you would no longer get it. But remember, these guilds aren't run by a democracy or a consensus. They're run by one central individual who farms out all this work to all these individual people. You get to play as part of the guild. Okay, I contributed 0.001% of the effort, so I get a little bit of the payout. But again, the guy making the money, the pickaxe and shovel, is the guy running the guild.
Would there be any advantage to taking someone like Win and say giving him a fake Bitcoin number?
Give you a fake Bitcoin number. Sure, if you didn't understand how it worked, but as soon as you went ahead and tried to create a transaction, because the way you control that, it's public-private key pair. Public key gets posted out there. You hold your private key. The idea being is that if you're going to do a transaction, you can sign the transaction as the seller or the transferor of the Bitcoin with your private key. It can be validated with the public key, which is posted up there, and they go, yeah, indeed, this is real. But if I can break it into your laptop and steal your stuff, and I can steal your private key, I can empty out your account. That's what happens when your wallets are stolen. People are printing them out and putting them on pieces of paper, so they're actually not in electronic format anymore.
Gee, do you know how much Bitcoin went through Silk Road? I mean, the total spend just over time?
Well, total spend over time, well, they said about 40,000 transactions a day right now. I don't know the dollar value on average of that. You could go back and you could go through that transaction. You got 5 years worth of data. Right. Go find a big data miner, and you can produce all kinds of stuff. But if I transferred money to you, and I just sit around and wait for your public key to show up again, and then I know that you offloaded it to somebody else. So it's not anonymous. If I seize your laptop as law enforcement, and I can get a hold of your private key, I get your private public key, I see every single transaction you did. And so unlike doing a transaction where I'm selling or buying illegal goods in an alleyway, and then law enforcement comes by and says, well, those weren't my $100 bills. You know, we don't have fingerprints on them. There's no DNA. I never saw it. You can't prove anything. Now you've got rock-solid cryptographic evidence that it was you. What are you going to do in court? Argue that the Bitcoin crypto is bad? So the anonymity that seems to appeal to organized crime is more based on the ignorance of the criminals doing it. I would say it's disorganized crime that seems to like it. Organized crime just wants to steal it so they can fence it. But let's get back to our task at hand. Can we go ahead and build a weapon with this stuff? Because there's two ways we can point this digital weapon. One way is that if we are the Winklevi and the U.S. Department of Justice or Satoshi and Company or any of those pairs, what happens when you have a thinly traded something and you start to sell a lot of it?
It crashes.
It crashes. George Soros was able to do that when he went ahead and broke the back of the British pound. We saw that also happen with the Malaysian ringgit. We saw back in World War II the Germans with a massive counterfeiting operation going ahead and dropping about 140 million pounds in well-printed notes. In fact, I think the way they discovered the notes, they're better printed than the British. And they're going to totally dilute their economy by going ahead and poisoning the economy there. But it could also be pointed the other direction. Think about this. What's happening with Greece? If Greece eventually decides to bug out of the euro, or they get kicked out of the euro and they decide to go back on the drachma, how strong of a currency is the drachma going to be? Not very to begin with. So imagine if I'm Satoshi and Company, and at today's current values, I now have about $1 billion. Well, if this thing goes up another order of magnitude, if you got $10 billion to play with, you can outplay George Soros. And now what do? Is that if we accept this as a mainstream currency, I just short the daylights out of the drachma, drive it down to zero, cover my position. I got a $10 billion I can pledge as collateral with somebody, lets me use it in exchange, and then I reload my digital weapon, plus I made a profit, so I stock more in there. So what I have is a reloadable financial digital weapon. I start shooting at small currencies, and I take them out and make money, but eventually I could aim very, very high, even going to national standards, and potentially, theoretically, could you go after the US dollar itself? I don't know. That's your challenge. By the way, is our goal to amass all the Bitcoins? You saw one of them getting passed around the room. It's a nice, pretty picture of them, and they're pretty snazzy. But wait, there's more. There are others. Because if you take a look at the exchange, there's all kinds of exchanges out there in lots of different digital currency. You can create one. And in fact, the crazy thing is this. Cryptocurrency's gone to the dogs. Anybody recognize that photograph?
No.
Shiba Inu. What's Gigi very mean? So viral. Well, guess what? Shiba Inus have their own cryptocurrency. It is Dogecoin. And we laugh, but the Dogecoin was created on December 6th, just last month. It has already mined 35 billion Dogecoins. And last week they hit the international news when they cashed in $30,000 worth to get the Jamaican bobsled team to the Olympics this year. For real! Now, if you can go ahead and create that much value, 26-year-old in Australia, among the brain power in this room, we sit down and we come up with our own little cryptocurrency. Within 60 days, we could all be retired and set for life.
I'll provide the booze and food.
We don't provide the win. Wait a minute. The win coin. Okay, there we go.
The short
No.
We can
The
call it the
Shara.
short town.
The Shara coin.
I'm tired of being Wynn's wife. I have a name.
Aha. And you have your own cryptocurrency. So,
Sure.
The details will have the camera turned off for that.
yes, exactly.
No, it's perfect. InfoWar coin.
The InfoWar coin. Yes. By the way, somebody already grabbed the domain DefCoin and things like that. So it's kind of a run on the domains right now. The reality is, let's get to work. What could you do? Think about it. Now's your chance to think evil. How could you use something like this as a weapon in either direction? I gotta sit down and stop talking because I wanted this to be interactive.
Well, if we don't care about the value of the coin,
Right.
we can certainly disrupt an economy by getting a public interest or gaining confidence in that particular seeming commodity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Information operations, run a campaign,
you know, and
use Dan Keel's knowledge and Use, where'd you go? Yeah, there you are, over there, yes. So, yeah, so I want to tie this together. Information operations campaign, we convince people it's a value, they start buying, and you drive up the price of something artificially, and of course you're making money selling it to the people who aren't smart enough to realize it has no value.
But why do it? I mean, other than greed. Okay?
Other than greed.
Obviously, that's the primary motivation here. But if you take that off the table,
All right.
Could you destabilize?
Could I destabilize the Irani currency?
are you trying to throw Iran into a panic? Are you trying to cause social unrest? Or what are you trying to do here?
Depends on who I am. If I'm Saudi Arabia, perhaps. If I'm Israel, perhaps. United States, maybe not. All of a sudden, kumbaya, hey, let's come talk about all these nuclear weapons things you got. But now we're finding out that in the world of geopolitics, in the realpolitik, it's not greed that drives you, it's national interest. What is in the U.S. national interest that if the United States, assuming that that's the actor, could do with a reloadable digital weapon? Could they go around and start messing with or destabilizing the currencies of regimes unfavorable to the U.S., or maybe just firing warning shots like the flash crash that we had in the stock market about a year and a half ago? Could that have been somebody walking into the head of, the stock exchange and saying, I want you to pay attention to something, watch this. All of a sudden the market starts dropping and then walks back up and says, okay, so remember, next time you hear from me.
Could we backdoor it? Is that feasible?
How so?
So it's trackable in some way?
It is trackable in some way, but the way you do that is twofold. Number one is that I require people to register on my exchanges, which is what's going to happen if it becomes a mainstream currency, because the banking secrecy laws require me to identify people. But also, could I man in the middle all of these public-private key pairs? So you think you're putting stuff up there, you think that's your public key. In fact, every time you check it through the exchange, it looks right, but the guy in the middle is actually giving you a key to deal with him. He's got the real key to deal with the rest of the world, and at some point in time, you run out the door with $35 million worth, and nobody hears from you again.
Or if you could simply track transactions and talk some group into using it, like some dissident population using it for all your less than on the upside needs, and you could track all their behavior.
Sure, especially if you can track the IP connections on there and you know where they're coming from. And
so,
well, you could also pull off the Brewster's Millions.
Yeah, skim it.
Part of your question was,
we just heard these were going to disappear, those kinds of things, because it wasn't economically feasible for the cyber criminal to, have that kind of an organized crime.
Well, let's think about it. I don't think there's been any new technology ever invented that cybercrime, that organized crime hasn't taken advantage of. And we find out the internet now recently has eclipsed prostitution and drug selling and protection rackets as the number one revenue. They don't file quarterly reports. They don't know exactly what it is.
Extremely conservative.
Yes.
No one's gonna, play with the Russian mob's $1 million in Bitcoin.
Well, no one's going to probably want to steal it from them, but their thought is, if they steal it, is it anonymous enough to it's worth a try? You're going, no. So,
catch me if you can.
Catch me if you can. But if you're the Russian mafia, theoretically speaking, could you do an op where you get stuff knowing that you're pretty much immune from prosecution? There's no extradition treaties that are going to exist between you and the target. And besides, if Bitcoin doesn't have a real value and somebody quote-unquote steals your Bitcoin, how do you prove in a court of law they stole something of value?
We don't care. We'll break their news anyway.
Well, if you can get to them, but if they're 8,000 miles away. All right, but remember, digital weapon. How would you take out a national currency with this, assuming you could get enough of them?
Maybe not take out a national currency, but if your perspective is the U.S. and I want to do something that benefit the U.S., could I use it to, in turn, start to mess with the international bond market, mess with the foreign countries that are holding my treasury bonds, and work that to be value?
You could do that. Remember, what we're saying is now that by creating value out of nothing, if you will. Now, George Soros had to work pretty hard for a lot of years and make a lot of really smart bets to end up with 10 figures to bet with. But here we're saying somebody could have 10 figures to bet with for doing nothing other than publishing a white paper. Now, pretty good, which is why we're seeing all these other additional currencies coming out. And some of them are going to flame out, but right now it's the Wild West days. So that's why I said if you want to build your own, the Doji coin is built around a joke, a meme, and yet it's got value. It is the #1 mined coin because think about it, the majority of the electrical energy being used to mine these days is going after a Doji coin because it's considered easier to get them than it is to go ahead and get a Bitcoin because the number of transactions require the calculations. So people are going to look for easier to solve things. And remember, it's an emotional currency, in my opinion. Make people feel good about mining, they will come to you. If you build it, they will mine it.
Well, assuming that there's an upper limit on miners.
Yes.
And would it make sense that once currencies get to a certain level, that most of the miners would start shifting, or the non-gilded miners, the free miners,
yeah,
would start shifting to newer currencies?
Where they could get more chance of success, absolutely. Which then would suggest an infinite stream of new digital currencies with an easier work factor, but then that creates the question, how do I convert them back? They go through those exchanges. We find some of these currencies are going to flame out, and many of them probably will at some point, but right now they're all playing. Somebody got all the plates spinning at once. A couple of them are starting to wobble, some are still spinning up, but right now you can hop from plate to plate to plate. Can you come up with a strategy? How about arbitrage? You go and look at all the major exchanges, they're not synchronized. Now, if I go ahead and with enough capital in the background, because these things don't clear immediately, but I can book transactions and lock them down, buy here at 880, sell over there at 900, and do that all day long. Well, eventually what's going to happen if I got a good arbitrage in the middle? They're all going to harmonize. The prices are going to settle out because I've squeezed the inefficiency out of the market, which does what for the market? They feel confident in it, which means it's going to start to do this, and all the arbitrage that I squeezed out will now rise in value, and I do even better. I follow it all along the way. Because right now the competition is in the miners. The next wave of competition is going to be in the arbitragers.
But this still doesn't tell us how we weapon.
Right. I want you guys to tell me. I'm just giving you the tools. I'm Lex Luthor. I want you to build me something. I'm an evil genius, but I'm delegating.
Well, which side do you want to attack? Do you want to attack? Do you want to attack the legitimate currencies and the legitimate nation states, or do you want to attack the new currencies, the exchanges?
Give me no plan for both.
Well, you've already given us the plan for the nation states.
Yeah, I've given you kind of the outline of a plan. So let's think of other possible targets.
Take the exchanges. All you have to do is identify the actors, right? And go old school and throw them a few phishing messages and see who bites.
You could mess with them that way. So a lot of the old tools will still work there. You're going after the soft targets then, the meat, the carbon, not the silicon.
What I would do is form a new mining guild and possibly start my own currency.
Okay.
So, because the people that are contributing, your miners for the guild, they're not getting quarterly reports from you or an annual report. They don't know how much you're actually skimming. And so if I'm dabbling in new currencies and or a currency I've created, they don't know what I've skimmed and I'm holding back for 6 months to let it
They don't know you're skimming right now in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people in the guild. Hey, there's 2 million people in the guild. There's only 1 million, so you get 2 million. 50% profit.
Even if I can't affect a nation state, once I've got my money. So I've now got something to deal with or be able to impact something. So maybe I can't deal with the nation state, but going Eddie Murphy trading places. The orange juice futures.
Yes.
Where the two old guys were making all of their money every year just because they had the information 12 hours in advance. Yeah. So I will pick an industry or I'll pick an area of critical infrastructure in a nation or EU, wherever else, and I should be able to, if I can't, it may not be the drachma where I can do an entire country, but I should be able to do an industry.
You could, and in fact, go back to Scott Borg and some of the things that Scott was able to do in some of these war games, where you go ahead and you take over these very, very low margin critical industries, like, I don't know, ball bearing manufacturers. If you could take them out, what could you do to a nation's economy, particularly on a wartime footing, if they no longer had access to ball bearings? Yeah, we don't guard the ball bearing factory when we go to war, but yet take that out, could make a mess.
What if your objective is a little bit larger? Maybe you're the U.S. government, and you want to take out Bitcoin.
I want to take out Bitcoin, all right? I could pass a law But what's that going to do?
So you'd maybe have to do some of the stuff that we talked about earlier and
Yeah.
go to actually cyber war against the exchanges, right?
How about this? I go ahead and I give a call over to Fort Meade, and I said, hey, you want to get back at Snowden? Go ahead, mine every last Bitcoin out there. Guess what? You'll be firstest with the mostest. 20 zeros? We'll do 50 zeros. And we'll do it in 3 milliseconds. We don't need 10 minutes. So all of a sudden, what happens is the whole currency is all shifting over, and all the rest of it's going to go over to Fort Meade.
I'd rather take over an exchange and then use that. If my perspective is from government, use the exchange, maybe not even skim off of it. Make sure I'm the most attractive exchange out there so everybody goes through me. But now everybody's going through me. I know where the money's going, and I know the real bank accounts that this fake money, the laundered money's getting put back into.
And now you're back more along the lines of what might be a more proper use of a national level asset in information space to be able to identify and track those transactions and trying to look for arms transfers and things like that, assuming that little Johnny buying a graphics card from Tiger Direct is not the guy you're looking for, and so you ignore that. Well, how do you make your exchange more valuable or more attractive to other people than the ones that are out there right now?
Maximize trust, minimize fees.
Minimize the fees. Minimize the fees. And, of course, you want to be trustworthy because there have been fake ones that have come up. So how do you validate that trust in the Wild West? You post $1 billion bond.
Put the government stamp of approval on it.
Government stamp of approval, but the whole idea is countercultural. I want a currency that has nothing to do with the evil governments. This is a little bit of anarchist in here saying, we're going to be around after the zombie apocalypse takes out all the governments, but there will still be Bitcoin.
Little Snowden faces on all the coins.
Or pirate ships.
Snow coins.
Pirate ships.
Yeah. Snow coins.
Find ways to post a physical guarantee.
Post a fiscal guarantee.
Buy that domain right now.
Here's this vault full of gold.
I expected to see some domains being bought as I'm talking right now.
Well, the other thing too is just
Same for you, home
exchange
viewers.
for hard currency.
Right.
Yeah, it's the exchange to hard currency, and that there runs. Where's the rub? Is that if every time there's a run on a thinly traded commodity, and we'll call it a commodity for what it is, you're going to eventually burn through the buyers and the sellers, one way or the other. Either the price can go through the roof, it's going through the floor. And what happened was there weren't a whole lot of people willing to sell back in November, December when you saw it go for 200, 300. And the Chinese, by the way, let's bring them into the equation. What had happened about 4 years ago, in Chinese, there was an effort to create a digital currency. It got smacked and shut down. If you're in China, if you have some newfound wealth because of the industrialization that's taken place in Guangzhou and some of the other eastern provinces, and you want to be relatively assured that the government is not going to take it or confiscate it, you're not quite certain about the exchangeability of the renminbi and where it's going to be if they float it, where do you want to do? You want to put your value in something not controlled by your government, i.e. Bitcoin, and that's what caused a lot of that porpoising. And then, of course, when the Chinese government said, no, we saw it come back down, but not as far back down as it came from. So it's on a sawtooth up. But at some point in time, it's either going to go off to infinity, it's going to stabilize, or it's going to break bad.
Well, I mean, it's not really good as a currency. I mean, you buy milk today with it, and then tomorrow it turns out your milk went from $2 a gallon to $1,200 a gallon, right? I mean,
and there was a guy early on who bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin back at the end of 2008. People said, "How do you feel now?" He said, "It was a really good pizza." It's the only way it can be mentally healthy is to say it was a good pizza.
Right. So I mean, this tool seems to be actually one that you would want to use for greed. I think.
Use it for greed.
Is
that emotion or is that economic?
Well, it's an emotion.
It's an emotion. 2 for emotion, 0 for economics so far on Bitcoin. We should take a little bit of scorecard here. How many emotions can we build up on the asset column? How many financial realities can we build up on that? And that might help us balance.
So I think it's a psychological operation.
Psyop.
You're manipulating people's feelings about their national currency against another currency, which is really its values based entirely in emotion.
I mean, I'd argue it's borderline mainstream now. I saw the other day, I probably have a bad habit more than I should of watching CNN Money and their retirement column. And looked in there, and some guy had the audacity to ask the editor, should I put my retirement savings in Bitcoin?
Well,
We should start a mutual fund that's.
it's already being done. That's what the Winklevi are doing.
That's a great idea.
No, the Winklevi are doing that. They registered with Securities Exchange Commission for the Winklevi fund. And it's all going to be based on Bitcoin value going up or down.
So that's just one bit. That's just one cryptocurrency. If you do, because you're going to be retiring in more than 20 years from now, so we're going to distribute it across the range of cryptocurrencies. And
Buy a basket of them.
yeah.
And
we could do age-based funds.
Yes.
yeah, age-based funds.
So these
So,
are
I mean,
these
so-
are higher risk.
You look at Amazon,
Let's get, yeah, let's do you, and then we'll get a new guy in here.
okay, and they are doing similar type things because you can have a store, they give you Amazon credits,
Right.
you can buy other products with those Amazon credits. So it's not a digital currency, but it's still an alternate means of exchange, right?
Gift cards.
So, gift
Gift
cards.
cards.
It's a digital gift card.
If these are kinds of ways in which people may be more or less confident that the digital currency would seem to be a competition with things like Amazon, right? Which,
You think Bezos is going to take that laying down?
no.
Probably not, so we might see him weigh in. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I was thinking, what happens if you create your own currency, right? You set up an exchange that says you bring your Bitcoin in through here,
Yes.
and I'll give you this currency in exchange.
Right.
In reality, your currency is not really worth anything.
None of them are.
Right? So you're racking up all this Bitcoin,
Yeah.
you're giving somebody else garbage.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, either the Bitcoin's going to go up or down, you're an instant millionaire overnight, while this person is now homeless.
Well, then that suggests diversification would be wise.
Doesn't this all get back to Scott's point about value?
Yeah. What's the value? So the value is the artificial scarcity. At the end of the day. Now, what happened in 1913? What did we end up? What did the United States end up doing?
Stopping the Buffalo nickel.
I stopped the Buffalo nickel, and they also started. Well, they
Started
the Buffalo nickel. They stopped the Liberty nickel.
Right.
But the Federal Reserve, because what had happened is the U.S. prior to that was on a gold-based standard, and then they also were able to add silver to it with a lot of lobbying and pushing for it. But the thing was, the number of dollar bills you could produce had to be back one for one with the equivalent amount of gold or silver, which limited the number of dollars that could be in circulation, which created some financial crises and crashes and things like that. It turns out, though, that if you have a central controlling body and you go to a fiat currency and you actually manage it correctly, when your GDP or economy grows by about 3%, you want to increase your money supply for about 3%. Just think about it. Fixed number of Bitcoins, we all go to Bitcoin tomorrow. Well, what happens is that now if half the population making Bitcoin, I'll pay it 10 Bitcoins a month. Woohoo, 10 grand, it's not bad money. Well, next year, because there's more people but not that many more Bitcoins, I can only pay it 9 Bitcoins instead of 10. It's a deflationary thing. And therein lies the danger with all of these things. What I think is the killer combination, which I haven't seen yet, is a crypto fiat currency with a central bank similar to a Fed, who can actually regulate it and will be accountable to the membership in a way that says, wow, we will grow this thing at a responsible rate. That will really smooth out the exchange rate, and that might take hold.
So you guarantee it's going to grow by 2% a year?
Or whatever, because, well, it is going at a certain rate. The problem is the adoption rate is far outstripping right now Bitcoin its slow growth rate.
You have the hockey stick already.
Yeah, the hockey stick is up there, but the problem is the interest has gone way past the production level. They might either settle back down, or the true Bitcoin believers say Bitcoin really should be worth $100,000 apiece.
So how do the Chinese attack the derivative market on Bitcoin futures?
Well, let's come up with a plan. You're Chinese.
We sell a future and some fake coins and crash the market.
How do you create fake coins in a cryptographically protected system?
Well, you basically put enough of them out there that when people don't cash them in, they don't work, and they no longer trust the system.
You're saying seeded with so much noise that the value of finding which is the physical device.
Yeah.
Or see it with rumors that the NSA is tracking it.
How's that?
And we can shift over to snow coins right away through his exchange.
Yeah. We're still chasing artificial coins, but we haven't weaponized them.
Right, because we go back to information warfare or operations in cyberspace, and we determined that the real value or measure of effectiveness was its impact on the perception of decision makers or the decision-making apparatus, or in the actual outcomes in the real world. So just as they said, it's not operations in cyberspace if I go ahead and alter all your files on your archives and you never ever look at them again until you die, and it's wasted time. But if I can change your perception, I win. And so what I want to do is I want to have some physical effect that I can take back out to meat space. Remember, this is like a dream. You can dream about seeing a lot of money, you can put your hands on it, but it doesn't work when you wake up, you're still laying in bed and you don't have the money with you. It doesn't come out that way. The only real value from the internet into meat space is if you can extract money out of it, and the only way you do that is you convince somebody to exchange whatever it is you did in there for something they're doing out here. And thus goes back to psychological operations.
Sounds like dark matter in the universe.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the first talk.
George, you scratching your head, or you're going to contribute?
About China, right? It was about changing people's perception.
Yeah. And so
we've effectively done that. We've changed the perception of the value of national currencies.
Yeah. And so you can artificially hold it down, which we've accused the Chinese of doing. You can peg your currency to somebody else's, or you can do what some nations in Europe have done and take a free ride on somebody else's being responsible and being relatively irresponsible in terms of your spending, at which point you create massive frictions and crises with your national bonds, even though you have euros.
That's the problem with derivative product. They don't